Hello. Welcome back to the pub. Good afternoon, and welcome to the POLITICO Pub at the 2026 Munich Security Conference. I'm Victor Jack, a Brussels-based defense reporter with POLITICO. And here on stage with me is Andreas Schierenbeck, the CEO of Hitachi Energy, here to chat with me about how energy security and national security are increasingly intertwined. So, Mr. Schierenbeck, thanks so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. So I want to dive straight in and talk a little bit about this kind of emerging nexus of energy security and sort of hard and defense security. I mean, we know the two are becoming increasingly intertwined in a world where adversaries like Russia are engaging in hybrid warfare and targeting vulnerabilities in our civil infrastructure, from cable cutting in the Baltic Sea to cyber attacks on Europe's grids. So I want to maybe just start by asking a fairly general question, which is, I mean, how worrying is this trend to you? How vulnerable really are we to sort of some of these emerging threats to our energy system?
Yeah, it's a good question, and thank you for having me. I think we're living in a world which has radically changed in the last couple of years. In the world of energy and utilities, you always try to balance sustainability, availability, and cost together. But energy safety and security was not really high on our list. And probably it's fair to say that a couple of years ago, 5 years exactly, it was the first time since a long time, since the oil crisis, probably in the 70s, energy was bluntly and openly used as a weapon. And I think that puts the question about energy security and safety back on the agenda. We see now that actually attacking on energy infrastructure is a common thing in Ukraine. And I think if you asked me, are we prepared for that, I would say no. We haven't had that on the radar. We have now time to react, but I think we are not really prepared for that.
Interesting. And are there some areas in particular of our energy system which are particularly sort of vulnerable that we could sort of highlight, sort of a couple of examples?
Well, I would say we just see what is happening. We are vulnerable in a multiple way. You have seen the thing in Berlin where a few cables actually have caused that a couple of thousand people actually were without energy and heating for a week. So it definitely shows that our networks are vulnerable, especially if it's public information. As well, we have actually nearly no spare parts. If equipment is destroyed, it takes a long time to replace it because we have never done any stocking for that or ever looked from that. Yes, we are dealing with cybersecurity, and we are very well prepared for that, I would say, because that's what we have been used to. But everything else, I think there's some work to do. Having emergency plans, having stocks, being prepared for that.
Absolutely. And before, I guess, getting into some of the possible solutions or fixes there, I mean, you mentioned cyber attacks, and I'm really interested in this. I mean, we're obviously seeing, mounting offensive cyber activities suspected, to be coming from Russia across many EU countries. But I mean, in terms of, what you're hearing and sort of some of the clients that you interact with, I mean, how big of a problem is this, and how many cyber attacks sort of are we seeing these days against the grids? And are these sort of on the rise at the moment?
Well, I think there are not too many official data because nobody is really sharing that. But of course, these networks were always under attack. Yes, sometimes more intense, sometimes less. But I think that's not something new. And in the cyber world, I think there's one rule: no system is hackable. So I think you have to be prepared to detect it and to contain it and to react. But I think that's something where we're used to it and we have good standards in the industry.
Interesting. And we've highlighted, I guess, some of the problems there. But I mean, in terms of looking at some of the solutions, what can the EU and even, I guess, what could NATO do to help kind of alleviate some of these issues in your view?
Well, I think we can do quite a lot. And I think, yes, we can talk about grid and the assets, and that's an important part of that. But any kind of dependency, I think, has been shown that it's not a good idea. Going from one dependency of Russian gas to another dependency, I think, is probably a technical risk at least, or a strategic risk. So we have to diversify. We have to have multiple sources. We need redundancy. We need options. We have to use what we have. And that's actually strategic thinking where we should start to do our homework.
I think it's interesting, yeah, you mentioned that because And the European Commission has said that, in the coming months, it's going to propose a kind of security strategy, which I think was interestingly timed with the US security strategy that was not too long before that. I mean, do you have any kind of expectations or a little bit of a wish list in terms of how you'd like to see energy and the energy system kind of mentioned within this European strategy?
I think I would be surprised if energy and energy systems are not mentioned in that, because at the end, if you just learn from what is happening, it starts with sourcing energy, how to diversify it, how to make sure that we have everything what we have. It comes to spare parts and redundant capacity. If you look to Ukraine, you can destroy a transformer with a shotgun in 5 seconds. It takes months or years to replace it. So if you're coming from a broader perspective, we have a strategic oil reserve since the oil crisis. We have a strategic gas reserve since the gas crisis. But I think we need a reserve for critical components as well, which means we have to standardize that we can use equipment from others. We should know what equipment we need. We should look at our energy grids from a point of view of safety and security, from a strategic point of view. Maybe we need more redundancy and more interconnectivity to exchange and harden our network. So there are quite a lot of things we should discuss, and we should find an answer for that.
Interesting. And within the sphere of critical raw materials, something that's often discussed is building up these emergency stockpiles. Is that something you think that would be sensible also for the EU to perhaps consider for components, as you say, transformers and others, where either we have slight shortages or they're at risk of potentially being attacked?
Well, that's an interesting question, because stockpiling is probably helping with few of these issues, but probably it's not an easy answer. First of all, for the equipment we are producing for distribution of energy, we don't need so many raw materials. We need electric steel, we need copper, and we need pulp and paper for insulations, basically, which came to me as a surprise. I think we can do that. Copper is maybe another issue, because the amounts what we need. In rare earths, I'm coming from a different angle. Rare earths are not that rare. We have them in Europe, we have them in the US. We just decided for economical reasons to shut down the mining and the production, and we left that all to China. That was our decision. We can, of course, re-ramp that, or we can stockpile. So I think it's not that there is a natural monopoly of that. It is a chosen monopoly. We have chosen to let it happen.
I see. But even in terms of, full components themselves, like transformers, would it be helpful for the Commission to consider, for example, ordering a kind of mandatory, slightly surplus quota of, countries having these on hand for, in a scenario or a situation where there are potentially more kind of attacks, hybrid attacks, cyber attacks, whatever, that could threaten, our supplies of these components?
That's one way to look at it. Actually, there are 3 things. You can define strategic stockpiles, like you have an oil and gas reserve. That's fine. The other thing would probably to look what actually is the capacity we need in case of, and secure that. Korea is doing a great job on that, securing certain production capacity for certain stuff. I said, look, we pay for that, we reserve that, we can use that. The other way is probably to think about, we are now committed to 5% of defense spending in GDP. 3% is going directly to defense, and around 1.5 in things of infrastructure double use. So you could think about it, certain things like more redundancy and so on could be financed or considered as a kind of defense spending as well, because energy is politics and it's defense. It cannot really separate these things.
Absolutely. And I think one thing you touched on, which I want to sort of follow up on a little bit, is, energy security is ultimately also about dependency, right? And the EU has done well in agreeing to ban Russian gas by 2027. That's now enshrined in law. But, last month's Greenland crisis was a big wake-up call for many European countries that also now see the US as not perhaps so reliable a partner. From an energy perspective, do you see any risks of how much we've become dependent also on the US for LNG imports, for example?
Well, let me answer that in a general way. Any single dependency from whatever it is a bad idea in the energy business. There can be technical reasons that you don't get the molecules you wanted. So the name of the game in energy was always the diversification of the risk, having always a second and a third source with optionality, because always something can happen. Just think about COVID. COVID has interrupted all the supply chains. Nothing was moving. That was not an issue of trust. It was just happening for a complete different reason. So I think you should always look at your energy portfolio in a way. What do I have? What do I need? What happens if one of the sources is not coming through for whatever reason? And how to deal with that? That can be political reasons, that can be technical reasons, that can be economic reasons, whatever. I think that's the right approach. The inconvenient truth is it will cost more. If you always go to the cheapest source and think it will hold, I think we know how that paid out for Europe and for Germany especially. So safety and security and that and optionality comes with a price, as well with redundancy, having spare parts and all these things. So we should not ignore that, but we should be very open about it.
And when it comes to diversification of, for example, our gas imports in Europe, what are some, sensible countries or regions that we could be looking at, to diversify that sort of pool of imports?
I wouldn't put it too much into geopolitics. It really depends that you have multiple sources. You could, we are using, of course, Norway with pipelines. Netherlands has decided to shut down their production actually nearly completely now. Yes, we have LNG, but LNG are coming with ships. We have not a pan-European gas network. Spain has a lot of resources for LNG, but it cannot go anywhere because there are no pipelines through France. So we have to look for interconnectivity. If the North Atlantic is probably not a good idea for LNG ships, we cannot use the Mediterranean at the moment, or only limited, because there are not so many pipelines or so much capacity for that.
And I guess, one solution also to this dependency that, as touted by some, is Europe should be essentially doubling down on its renewables growth, right? As a way to kind of become more independent also on energy. Is that something that you would agree with?
But that's part of the strategic discussion. You see a lot of countries like India and China which are betting on renewables because that's the only things they have. India has no molecules, no coal, no gas, no oil. So they're investing heavily into renewables and in making it baseload ready. Because they have it. And actually it has a positive effect on the economy, because whatever you not import is good for your country. Your rating is going up, your interest is going down. So what we have on renewables, we should use. But we have to take into account, you cannot build an affordable grid or energy system only on renewables. You can go to 60, 70, 80%. The last 20% or 30% has come from a different source. It can be hydro, like in Norway, dams. It could be nuclear. It could be gas if you have nothing else as an emergency. But the mechanics from a financial way and from a technical way are that you need a combination of different sources.
And I know this one might be a little bit of a sort of tricky one to answer, but do you suspect on some level that, the reason behind the US railing against and hitting out so much at Europe for its green transition and for its sort of renewables uptake is potentially because the US wants Europe to remain deeply dependent on the US for its energy and to keep essentially funding its industry?
Well, it's hard to answer that because we don't have any material proof for that. And on the other hand, you can purchase LNG from a lot of sources in the world. So it's not a single source. Yes, US has a lot of gas, and that's why I understand the decision to deal with what you have. They have a lot of gas. Yes, they're exporting it, but there are Qatar, there's Australia, there are other sources where you can get LNG. So it's not a single source. So I think we have to respect that some countries don't like nuclear, other countries don't like renewables. It's up to them to define their sustainable strategy, how to build a reliant and safe energy grid.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to maybe touch on also kind of European competitiveness, because this has been, very much a top theme this week as well. If we cast our minds back earlier to sort of Wednesday, Thursday, we had EU leaders that just came back from a landmark meeting where they agreed on, fairly concrete steps for renewing the bloc's competitiveness. At the heart of this discussion is, whether Europe should advance a slightly more protectionist, made in Europe agenda and look more at joint debt, versus more free trade and more openness. I mean, obviously, energy very much kind of underlies that competitiveness push as well, given, energy prices are a key obstacle many see for European competitiveness. So, I mean, when it comes to Europe's energy system and this whole competitiveness debate, the more protectionist tilt and the more sort of openness tilt, which one do you see as perhaps the most kind of sensible route that Europe should be taking from an energy system perspective?
It's another very complex question. As an industrialist, of course, we have to follow the rules and the tariffs and the framework the politicians put in front of us, and we have to react in a sensible way and follow the law. Nevertheless, I believe in free trade. Sorry, that has made us successful over the years, and that makes a lot of sense. So bringing up additional hurdles will probably not be good. On the other hand, we are just have reached a few milestones with free trade agreements with Indonesia, India, and Mercosur. So I think we should follow that line. I think we are only together stronger. On the other hand, energy is always political, and politics is always about energy. If you look what drives our energy prices, it's not the renewables, and it's not the grid actually. It's a lot of other things, how the market system is evolved, how the customers are reacting. If you look at the energy price on the stock exchange, only 20% of the energy actually is traded. Most people purchase the energy in the long way with long-term agreements, PPAs, and then you can buy it much, much cheaper than on a stock exchange. Everybody can do that and can say, look, I secure my energy supply for 4 or 5 years and I only buy the last 20%. Most companies don't do that, and they are gambling, if you ask me. So then don't complain about high energy prices, because that's only the short end, the last thing for the day or for the next day you want to close. You can get much cheaper energy if you lock in a renewable deal for the next 4 or 5 years with a PPA.
Absolutely, and I mean, it's interesting. Another kind of European kind of governance trend, let's say, when it comes to energy, is the EU is increasingly taking a bit more of a kind of centralized planning role when it comes to energy systems. I mean, the Commission late last year released its grids package, and as part of that, it basically wants to take more control over long-term planning for grid infrastructure. What do you make of this direction of travel, this kind of Europeanization and slightly more centralized approach to the EU tackling, the energy system?
I really welcome the grid package because it's a very good start. Because why does it take so long in Europe? Because permitting takes longer actually than constructing anything, and so going for more interconnections, for better framework will make it cheaper and better. A grid project normally takes 6 years in an optimal way. 3 years is planning and permitting, and 3 years is constructing. Come on, it's money spent on 3 years where nothing is moving. I think we can do that better and faster. On the other hand, there's a lot of regulation which is not helping. Take the Baltic Sea. If Germany wants to build a wind park in Danish waters, there is no way at the moment to transport that energy from the Danish waters directly to Germany, because it's in Danish waters, have to go to Danish earth, and then you can transport it to Germany, even if both countries would agree. Sorry, that's probably not very practical. So there are a lot of things we can do better and faster and work around that. And on the other hand, that's what I'm asking for, more interconnectivity, because it's good for all of us. Not all countries actually playing ball in that.
But I mean, is the Commission taking a slightly more kind of powerful and strong-armed kind of approach helpful in that respect, or not so helpful?
Well, we will see how that is accepted, because the Commission can draft that grid package and can push every member state in that. But energy is still local politics, and it has to be translated in laws, and it needs to be collaboration. But there as well, I would say, look, it's like the alliance of the willingness. That's the countries who want to work together. Let's work together for the good of them, and then we will see.
Absolutely. And maybe just last question on this topic. I mean, one thing that EU leaders sort of agreed on earlier this week was this kind of multi-speed Europe. So, as you've mentioned, kind of if there are smaller coalitions of countries that want to work together, then essentially they will kind of deepen their integration and how they sort of see, the legal situation and so on. I mean, is that something that is broadly positive for the energy sector, or would it actually be better to find a broader compromise that includes, all EU countries? I mean, how inhibitive is that for the development of the energy sector?
Maybe I'm too much a realist. For having 27 member states to agree on anything, it's very hard. So we have seen a lot of examples where this takes rather long or no action at all. So I would say if the Commission sets the guidelines and look, these are the rules, that's the thing what we want. And if some countries want to work together based on that rule set, let them do that. Don't wait for everybody. And hopefully then the others see the wisdom in that and signing off and joining the club. But waiting for the last one to make up their mind, sorry, we don't have the time and the money for do that.
Absolutely. All right, perfect. Well, that's all we have time for, but I want to thank you so much for joining us and urge everyone in the room to stick around for our upcoming sessions as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.